Isabella Carter had learned very early in life that the world did not slow down for anyone. It did not slow down when her father walked out on a Tuesday morning without leaving so much as a note. It did not slow down when her mother took on double shifts at the laundry to keep food on the table. And it certainly did not slow down when the doctors sat Isabella down in a pale green hospital room 3 weeks ago and told her, in calm and practiced voices, that her younger brother Leo had entered the final stage of kidney failure and needed a transplant within months, or he would not survive the year. The world kept spinning, and Isabella kept running. She was balancing 4 plates on her arms when she first saw him. The restaurant was called Meridian, one of those places in Midtown Manhattan where the chandeliers cost more than her rent, and the menu had no prices because if you needed to ask, well, you could not afford it. Isabella had worked there for 2 years, long enough to recognize every type of wealthy man who walked through those doors. There were the loud ones, the quiet ones, the ones who flirted, and the ones who stared through you like you were made of glass. Ethan Whitmore was the glass-staring type. He came in on a Thursday evening with 2 men in suits and sat at table 7, which was her table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than born. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, and his expression was the blankest she had ever seen on a human being. Not rude exactly, just completely absent of warmth, like a building after everyone had gone home. Isabella brought water and introduced herself with a smile. She had perfected over 2 years. He did not look up from his phone. One of the men with him ordered for the table without consulting him. Ethan Whitmore simply sat there, reading emails, present in body and entirely elsewhere in every other way. She refilled his water glass twice that evening without him once acknowledging her existence. When the bill came, his assistant signed for it and they left. A generous tip appeared, the kind that came automatically from a man who tipped well not because he cared but because it was efficient. Isabella thought nothing more of it. The next day she was called into her manager's office and told that one of their regular clients had requested her personally for a private dinner event at his residence. The client's name was Ethan Whitmore. She almost said no. Something about the blankness in his eyes made her uneasy. But the private event paid 3 times her normal rate, and Leo's hospital bill had arrived that morning with a number on it that made her hands shake. She said yes. The penthouse was on the 58th floor of a glass tower in the heart of the city. Helen, the housekeeper, answered the door and led Isabella through rooms that felt more like a gallery than a home. Everything was expensive and cold and perfectly arranged. Not a pillow out of place, not a single personal photograph on any wall. There were no other guests. There was no dinner party. Ethan Whitmore was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. He turned when she entered, and for the first time she saw him actually look at someone directly. He looked at her the way he probably looked at spreadsheets, assessing, calculating. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for coming. Sit down, please." She sat because she did not know what else to do. He sat across from her, folded his hands on the table, and spoke without preamble. "I have a problem," he said. "You have a problem. I believe we can solve both simultaneously." Isabella stared at him. "I'm sorry? My grandfather, Gerald Whitmore, is dying. He has perhaps 4 months left, possibly less. His will contains a clause that has existed for 30 years. Ethan's voice was even and unhurried, as though he were presenting quarterly earnings. "In order to inherit controlling shares of Whitmore Industries, I must be married before his death. If I am not, those shares transfer to my cousin James, who will dismantle the company and fire 4,000 people within 6 months." Isabella's mouth was dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need a wife," he said simply. "And I need one quickly. I have no interest in romance, no time for courtship, and no desire for any of this to be more complicated than it needs to be. What I need is a woman willing to enter a legal marriage for a period of 1 year, present herself as my wife at necessary public functions, and maintain absolute discretion about the arrangement." Isabella felt the room tilt slightly. "You want to pay someone to marry you?" I want to enter a contractual arrangement that benefits both parties, he corrected. She should have laughed. She should have stood up and walked out. But she thought of Leo in his hospital bed, of the number on that bill, of her mother crying quietly in the bathroom, where she thought nobody could hear her. How much? Isabella asked, and hated the way the words tasted. Ethan did not blink. Your brother requires a kidney transplant. The procedure, aftercare, and all associated medical costs total approximately $420,000. I will cover every cent paid directly to the hospital before we sign anything. Additionally, you will receive a monthly personal allowance of $15,000 for the duration of the marriage, and a settlement of $250,000 upon signing of divorce papers at the end of 12 months. The silence stretched between them. Isabella looked at her hands. She was still wearing her work uniform. She had come here directly from her shift, still smelling faintly of the kitchen. She was sitting in a 58th floor penthouse, being offered a solution to every problem that had been drowning her for months, by a man who looked at her like she was a line item in a budget. I want to see the contract before I agree to anything, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but something that might have been mild surprise. Of course. Patrick will send it to you tonight. You have 48 hours to have your own lawyer review it. I don't have a lawyer. Arrange one. Neutral party. No obligation to either side. She nodded slowly. And what would this look like? Living arrangements? You would move into the penthouse. There is a guest suite on the north end. My rooms are on the south end. We would have no reason to interact, except when required by social obligations. He paused. You would have full use of the residence, a car and driver, clothing allowance for public appearances, and complete personal freedom within the boundaries of the agreement. What boundaries? No romantic involvement with anyone outside the marriage during the contract period. Full discretion about the nature of the arrangement. Attendance at required events with appropriate behavior. He tilted his head slightly. And you will not attempt to extend the arrangement beyond 12 months or make any claim on assets outside what is specified in the contract. Isabella lifted her chin. And what about you? What are your boundaries? He seemed unprepared for the question. A small pause. I beg your pardon? You listed my obligations. What are yours? Another pause, longer this time. I will treat you with respect in private and in public. I will meet every financial commitment outlined in the contract on time. I will not make demands on your time beyond what is agreed upon, and I will not. He stopped. And for just a moment something crossed his face that she could not name. I will not treat you as anything less than what this arrangement requires you to appear to be. Isabella stood up. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. She looked at Ethan Whitmore, at his blank face, and his rigid posture, and his cold and careful eyes. And she thought about Leo, and she thought about her mother, and she thought about all the doors she had knocked on, and all the hands she had begged, and all the nights she had lain awake staring at the ceiling with no answer. Coming, send me the contract, she said. She walked out. In the elevator going down, she pressed her back against the mirrored wall and closed her eyes. When the doors opened at street level, she stepped out into the cold Manhattan night and called her mother. She said quietly. I think I found a way to pay for Leo's surgery. 3 days later, Isabella Carter signed her name at the bottom of a 40-page document. Ethan Whitmore signed beside her. Patrick Owens witnessed. Helen stood near the doorway with an expression that was impossible to read. When the signing was done, Ethan extended his hand across the table. Isabella shook it. His hand was cool and firm, no hesitation, no warmth. Welcome to Whitmore, he said. That night, in the guest suite, with its enormous bed and its view of a city that did not know her name, Isabella sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at the thin gold band on her left finger that had appeared from a velvet box during the brief civil ceremony that afternoon. Ethan had slid it on without looking at her face. The officiant had asked if he wished to kiss his bride. Ethan had leaned close, and for one strange suspended second, Isabella had felt her breath stop. But he only brought his lips near her ear and said in a voice that only she could hear, You will never be touched by me. You have my word. Then he stepped back. The officiant smiled. Helen dabbed her eyes for reasons Isabella could not understand. And just like that, it was done. Isabella lay back on the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling of her new life. 12 months stretching ahead of her like a road she could not see the end of, leading somewhere she had not planned to go. The first week inside the Whitmore penthouse was the quietest Isabella Carter had ever lived through. Not peaceful. Quiet. Not the kind that settles over you like a warm blanket on a Sunday morning. This was the quiet of a place that had forgotten what noise felt like. It was the quiet of marble floors and tall ceilings and rooms so large that her footsteps echoed back to her like a reminder that she did not belong there. Ethan left every morning at 6. She knew this because she was a light sleeper, and the sound of his door closing at the far end of the penthouse traveled down the long hallway with perfect clarity. He returned every evening somewhere between 8 and 10, went directly to his home office, and the light under that door stayed on until well past midnight. They shared the same air and roughly 3,000 square feet of living space and managed to interact for an average of perhaps 4 minutes per day, most of which involved him asking if she needed anything and her saying no thank you, and both of them going their separate ways with the polite efficiency of strangers on an airplane. Helen was the only real warmth in the place. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pinned back and a way of moving through the penthouse like she owned it. In every way that mattered, she did. She had worked for Ethan for 11 years, had watched him grow from a guarded young man into a guarded older one, and she spoke about him the way someone speaks about a complicated piece of weather, with a mixture of fondness and resignation. It was not always like this, Helen said one morning, setting a plate of toast in front of Isabella without being asked. There was a time when this place had music in it, when he laughed more than once a decade. Isabella wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. What changed? Helen was quiet for a moment, straightening things that did not need straightening. People he trusted chose other things over him. His mother left when he was 9. A woman he loved very seriously when he was 28 chose his business partner instead. He decided somewhere along the way that people were liabilities. She paused. He is not cruel. He is just very, very careful. Isabella thought about that for the rest of the morning. She had brought very little with her. A few boxes of clothes, her books, a small framed photograph of Leo and her mother taken at Leo's 16th birthday. She placed that photograph on the nightstand in the guest suite, and it was the only personal thing in the entire penthouse that belonged to her. On the 8th day, she decided she could not spend 12 months being invisible. It started small. She began coming down to the kitchen in the mornings instead of eating alone in her room. She talked to Helen, learned the names of the 2 other household staff members, a young man named Curtis who handled errands, and a woman named Betty who came 3 times a week to clean. She learned which plants in the living room were being quietly neglected and started watering them herself. She opened the heavy curtains in the sitting room that apparently nobody had opened in months. An afternoon light came flooding in across the pale rugs and the cold furniture and made the whole room look startled and grateful. Ethan noticed. She could tell because when he passed through the sitting room that evening on his way to the office, he stopped for just a fraction of a second and looked around as though trying to identify what was different. Like a man who comes home to find someone has rearranged the furniture by 2 inches, he did not say anything. But he did not close the curtains either. The real shift came on a Wednesday evening, 11 days into the arrangement. When Isabella was sitting at the kitchen island, attempting to cook pasta and managing, instead, to create something that smelled significantly more interesting than it looked. She had her music playing from her phone, something soft and rhythmic, and she was singing along under her breath, not performing, just existing, the way she always did when she cooked. She did not hear Ethan come in. He was early, which was unusual. She only became aware of him when she turned to grab the colander from the cabinet and found him standing in the kitchen doorway in his suit, briefcase still in hand. Watching her with an expression she could not classify, Isabella startled hard enough that she nearly dropped the colander. "I did not hear you come in," she said, pressing one hand to her chest. "I apologize," he said, and he sounded like he meant it, which surprised her. "I should have announced myself." A short silence sat between them. "I made pasta," she said, because it seemed necessary to explain the pot of water and the general chaos of the counter. "There is enough, if you have not eaten." He looked at the pot, then at her, then at the pot again. "I usually eat at the office." "At 8 in the evening?" "I have a chef there who keeps things available." Isabella tilted her head and looked at him with the particular expression she had perfected on Leo over years of sisterhood. The one that communicated clearly that she found an answer to be technically true, but fundamentally sad. "That is a lonely way to eat dinner." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, set his briefcase down on the counter in a motion that looked almost involuntary, like his hands made the decision before his brain signed off on it. "I suppose I could eat here tonight." She set a second plate without making a production of it. They sat at the kitchen island rather than the enormous dining table, which felt like the right call. The pasta was imperfect, slightly oversalted, the sauce a little thin, and Isabella said so before he could, which made something at the corner of his mouth move in a way that was almost a smile. "It is fine," he said. "You do not have to be diplomatic. I am not a good cook. I am an enthusiastic one, which is different." He looked up at her. "There is a difference. A good cook makes food that tastes right. An enthusiastic cook makes food that tastes like effort. The effort is the point." He was quiet for a moment, turning his fork. "Where did you develop that philosophy?" "My mother. She cannot cook either, but she fed us every single day of our lives with great determination and very mixed results. And every meal felt like love because of how hard she tried." Isabella lifted one shoulder. "I think that is worth more than technique." Ethan ate the rest of his pasta without speaking, but it was a different kind of silence than the ones they had been sharing. This one had some texture to it, some weight that was not entirely uncomfortable. He washed his own plate afterward, which she had not expected, and then he said goodnight and walked to his office, and the light came on under the door, as always. But that night, it went off at 11 instead of 1. Isabella noticed the dinners became a quiet habit over the following 2 weeks. Not every night, and never formally arranged, but he began coming home earlier on certain evenings, and more than once she looked up from whatever she was doing in the kitchen to find him already there. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, opening the refrigerator with the cautious expression of a man who had not fed himself without assistance in a very long time. "You could learn," she said one evening, watching him stand in front of the open refrigerator with an expression of genuine uncertainty directed at a carton of eggs. "To cook? It is not a personality transplant. It is just heat and timing." He looked at her sideways. "You make it sound simple. Some things that sound complicated are—" She took the eggs from his hand, which required her to step close enough that she could smell his aftershave, something clean and quiet. "Crack 2 of these. I am going to break the yolk. Then you will learn what happens when you break the yolk, and next time you will be more careful." He cracked the eggs. He broke 1 yolk. He looked at it with the focused displeasure of a man who did not tolerate imprecision. Isabella laughed. It came out before she could stop it, genuine and bright. And Ethan turned to look at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something open and unguarded. There for just a second before he recomposed himself. "Your laugh is very loud," he said. "Your face when you broke that yolk was very funny. Do not make funny faces. You absolutely do." She stirred the eggs in the pan. "You make a face like the egg has personally offended you, and you are deciding whether to fire it." He stared at her for a moment. Then, quietly, so quietly she almost missed it, he laughed. A real one, short and low and unpracticed. Like a sound that had been stored in a box for a very long time and was surprised to find itself out. Isabella kept her eyes on the pan and said nothing, because she understood instinctively that drawing attention to it would make him put it back in the box. They had their first real argument 10 days later, and it came from nowhere, the way real arguments usually do. They had attended a charity gala together, their 3rd public appearance, and Isabella had worn a deep blue dress that Helen had helped her choose. They had done well, she thought, standing close enough to look like a couple, his hand at the small of her back during photographs, her smiling at the right moments. She had even genuinely enjoyed parts of the evening. But then she overheard him. He was speaking to a business associate near the bar while she was returning from the restroom. And she caught her own name in his mouth and slowed without meaning to. "Your wife seems warmer than I expected from you," the man was saying. "She is well suited to these occasions," Ethan replied. "She understands what is required." It was not cruel. It was not even unkind, technically. But something about the clinical precision of it, well suited to these occasions, like she was a correctly chosen piece of equipment, hit her somewhere tender and unexpected. She said nothing that night. She was quiet in the car home and said goodnight in the hallway and went to the guest suite and sat on the bed and tried to talk herself out of caring. Because she had signed a contract, she knew what this was. She had no right to want him to say anything different. But caring is not something you can talk yourself out of. And she was beginning to understand, slowly and with great unease, that something had been shifting in her chest for the past 3 weeks. Something she had not budgeted for and could not afford. She almost had herself convinced. She was fine when there was a quiet knock at her door. She opened it. Ethan stood in the hallway in a dark sweater and trousers. No jacket, no armor of a suit, looking somehow younger and less certain than she had ever seen him. He was holding 2 mugs. "Helen made chamomile," he said. "She insists it helps with whatever this is." Isabella looked at him. Whatever what is? He was quiet for a moment, looking at the mugs rather than her. "You were upset tonight. After the gala?" "I am not certain what I said, but I am aware that something shifted." "I do not like the idea of having caused that." Isabella stepped back from the door and let him in. They sat in the 2 chairs by the window, the city glittering 40 floors below them, and she told him what she had heard. She told him plainly, without drama, the way she told most hard things. Just the facts laid out clearly in the open air. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not respond at all. "I have spoken about people in terms of their function for so long that I do not always notice when I am doing it," he said finally. "It is not a defense. It is an explanation." He turned the mug in his hands. "You are not a function, Isabella. I am aware of that. I am sorry that my language suggested otherwise." She looked at him in the low light of the room. This careful, closed-off, complicated man sitting in her chair with chamomile tea at midnight, trying in his precise and unnatural way to apologize for something he barely understood yet. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and stood to leave. And at the door, he paused with his hand on the frame and said, without turning, "For what it is worth. You were the best thing in that room tonight. Not because of what you wore or how you behaved. Just because of who you are." He left before she could respond. Isabella sat in the chair for a long time after that, holding her mug, looking at the city lights, feeling the floor shifting. Gently beneath everything she thought she understood about this arrangement, 12 months suddenly felt like very different. Math, the morning everything changed, began like every other morning had begun. For the past 2 months, inside the Whitmore penthouse, Isabella woke before 7, padded down the long hallway in her socks, and found the kitchen already smelling of coffee, because Ethan had started making a full pot instead of just a single cup somewhere around week 6. Without ever acknowledging that this was something he was doing for her benefit, she poured herself a mug and stood at the window looking out at Manhattan spread below her in the early gray light. And she tried to do what she had been trying to do for the past 3 weeks, which was to stop feeling what she was feeling. It was not working. The truth was that Isabella Carter had fallen in love with Ethan Whitmore, somewhere between the broken egg yolk and the chamomile tea at midnight. And she had done it quietly and completely and without any plan for what to do next. She had not intended it. She had signed a contract specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of complication. And yet here she was, standing in his kitchen in her socks, missing him when he was in the next room, counting the months left on their agreement, with a sinking feeling rather than the relief she was supposed to feel. For months remained. She had told nobody. Not her mother, not Leo, not even Helen. Though she suspected Helen already knew, because Helen had a way of watching both of them from across rooms with a small, composed smile that said she was several steps ahead of everyone. What Isabella did not know, could not have known that morning, was that 4 floors below in the building's private lobby, a woman named Claudia Voss had just stepped out of a town car and was on her way up. Ethan was in his home office when his phone buzzed with the front desk notification. He read the name and went very still. He set the phone down on the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a reaction they do not want to have. Then he stood, straightened his shirt, and went to the front door. Isabella was reading in the sitting room when she heard voices in the entryway. She was not trying to listen. The penthouse simply carried sound the way all large, quiet places do, and she heard a woman's voice, warm and confident, saying his name with the ease of someone who had said it many hundreds of times before. She looked up from her book. Ethan appeared in the doorway of the sitting room with a woman beside him. She was perhaps 32, elegantly dressed, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of composure that suggested she had never once said the wrong thing in a social situation. She looked at Isabella with an expression of polite surprise that did not quite reach her eyes. "Isabella," Ethan said, and something in his voice was different, tighter. "This is Claudia Voss. She's an old acquaintance. She'll be joining us for coffee." Isabella stood and shook the woman's hand and smiled the smile she had learned to produce on demand at Meridian, the one that was warm enough to satisfy but told nobody anything true. "Of course," she said. "I will leave you both to it." "Do not have to leave," Ethan said quickly. "I have some calls to make." She picked up her book. "Nice to meet you, Claudia." She went to her room and sat on the bed and was very honest with herself about what she was feeling, which was a specific kind of pain that had no good name. The pain of watching someone hold a door open for a version of your life you were never actually invited into. Helen appeared 20 minutes later with toast and the particular expression of a woman who has seen this specific situation before. She came without calling ahead. Helen said, setting the plate down. "He did not invite her." "It does not matter," Isabella said. "It matters very much," Helen said firmly. "That woman left him for his business partner 6 years ago. She is here because she heard he married and wanted to see for herself." Helen looked at Isabella with a directness that allowed no deflection. "And because she wants him back." Isabella looked at the toast. "He can make his own choices, Helen." "He can," Helen agreed. "But he is not always good at knowing what the right one is. He spent 2 years rebuilding himself after she left, and he did it by deciding never to need anyone again." She paused at the door. "Then you arrived and undid all of that in 8 weeks without even trying." Helen left. Isabella sat with that for a long time. Downstairs, the coffee with Claudia lasted 40 minutes. Ethan was civil and distant, and said everything that was correct, and felt nothing that he expected to feel. He had spent 6 years carrying the weight of what she did, the quiet devastation of being chosen against, and he had expected her presence to rattle something loose inside him. Instead, he sat across from her and thought about Isabella laughing at a broken egg yolk. And the thought arrived with such clarity and force that it startled him. When Claudia left, she touched his arm in the doorway and said they should have dinner sometime, just to catch up, and he looked at her hand on his sleeve and felt nothing except a mild desire for the conversation to be over. He closed the door and stood in the entryway for a moment. Then he went looking for Isabella. She was not in her room. She was not in the sitting room or the kitchen. He found her on the narrow terrace off the library, standing with her arms resting on the railing, looking out at the city. The wind was moving through her hair, and she had her eyes half closed, and she looked so completely herself, so entirely present in her own skin, that he stopped in the doorway and just looked at her for a moment, the way a person looks at something they are afraid of losing. "She is gone," he said. Isabella nodded without turning. "Good coffee? Visit?" "Short one." He walked out to stand beside her at the railing. The city moved and breathed 40 floors below them. She wanted to see if the marriage was real. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was." A pause. The wind moved between them. "Is that what you told her, or what you believe?" Isabella asked, and her voice was steady, but he had learned her voice well enough by now to hear what steadiness was covering. Ethan turned to look at her profile. "Isabella, you do not have to answer that." She pushed off the railing and turned toward the door. "For months left. We are doing fine. Let us not complicate things." He caught her hand. Not roughly, not dramatically. Just his fingers closing around her wrist the way they had once before in a hallway 2 months ago. And she stopped moving. "I need to tell you something," he said. She turned to face him. Her expression was careful and composed, and her eyes said something entirely different from her expression, which was a thing he had learned to read about her, the gap between her face and her eyes, the truth that lived in the space between them. "My grandfather called me this morning," Ethan said. Before Claudia arrived, kept his hand around her wrist, not pulling her closer, just holding. "He is declining faster than the doctors predicted. He wants to meet you." "He wants to meet my wife." Isabella was quiet. "When?" "This weekend. Connecticut." He paused. "He is a perceptive man, Isabella. He will know immediately if something is not genuine. I want to be honest with you about that." She looked at him steadily. "We have been pretending for 2 months. We can manage a weekend." "That is exactly what I am trying to tell you." His voice dropped. "I am not sure I have been pretending." The words landed between them, and neither of them moved. Isabella felt her heart doing something complicated and inconvenient inside her chest. She looked at him, at the careful way he was watching her, at the tension in his jaw that meant he had said something that cost him. And she thought about all the small, true things that had accumulated between them over 8 weeks. The dinners, and the laughing, and the chamomile tea. The way he moved his coffee mug to make space for her book without being asked. The way he had told her she was the best thing in the room without staying to see her reaction. "Ethan," she said carefully, "what are you saying?" "I am saying that the terms of our agreement feel insufficient." He let go of her wrist but did not step back. "I am saying that I do not want to reach month 12. I am saying that somewhere in the past 8 weeks, you rearranged something inside me that I had spent years organizing, and I find that I am not angry about it, which is the most surprising part." Isabella pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "You practiced that. I did not." "You absolutely did." "That was very well structured for an unrehearsed confession, Isabella." "I am deflecting because I am terrified," she said plainly, and the honesty in it stopped him completely. "Because I also have feelings that were not in the contract, and I have spent 3 weeks trying to talk myself out of them. Because I am very aware of who you are and what your life looks like, and I am a waitress from Queens, whose biggest asset, until 2 months ago, was her section at Meridian." Looked at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face before. Something unguarded and almost fierce. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Make yourself small to make this easier to decline." Stepped forward. "You are the most fully alive person I have ever been in a room with. You walked into my penthouse with 1 cardboard box and a photograph of your family, and within 2 weeks this place felt like somewhere a person could actually live." His voice was low and certain. "I do not care where you are from. I care who you are. And I know who you are, Isabella. I have been paying attention." The tears that arrived were not dramatic. They came quietly, one and then another. And Isabella did not wipe them away immediately because she was busy looking at Ethan Whitmore on a cold morning on a terrace in the sky. This man who had spent 6 years building walls and had just taken every one of them down. With a voice that did not waver once. "We still have 4 months left on the contract," she said softly. "Then let us spend them differently." She laughed through the tears. One short wet sound, and he reached up and brushed his thumb across her cheek with a gentleness that was so entirely at odds with everything she had first believed him to be that it made her breath catch. "Kay," she said. He kissed her then. On the terrace 40 floors above the city, with the wind moving around them, and Manhattan going about its ordinary business below, and it was nothing like their wedding day kiss, which had been a performance for witnesses. This was real, unhurried, and certain. The kind of kiss that is also a decision. The weekend in Connecticut arrived, and with it the white colonial house outside Hartford, where Gerald Whitmore had lived for 40 years. He was smaller than Isabella had pictured from Ethan's descriptions. A slight man in a cardigan with quick, bright eyes and the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now simply kind. He took one look at Isabella and one look at his grandson, standing beside her, and smiled with his whole face. "Well," Gerald said, taking Isabella's hand in both of his, "you were exactly what I hoped for." "You do not know me yet," she said honestly. "I know enough. I know you make him stand differently." He glanced at Ethan with the satisfied expression of a man whose plan has worked out precisely as intended. He used to walk into rooms like he was prepared for a fight. "Look at him now." Isabella looked at Ethan. Gerald was right. Something in his posture had changed, something in the way he occupied space, less braced, less defended. "You planned this," Ethan said to his grandfather, and his voice was not accusatory. It was something closer to grateful. "I planned for you to stop sleepwalking through your life." "Yes." Gerald squeezed Isabella's hand before releasing it. "The rest of it you two managed entirely on your own." The weekend was warm and ordinary in the best way. They ate meals around a table that had family photographs on the wall beside it. Gerald told stories about Ethan as a boy, a child who apparently cried at sad movies and built elaborate structures out of anything he could find, and once brought home an injured bird in his coat pocket with the complete conviction that he could nurse it back to health. Ethan sat through these stories with remarkable patience and only mild embarrassment. Isabella listened to everyone. On the last evening in Connecticut, she and Gerald sat alone on the back porch while Ethan was inside taking a call. The old man was wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill, and he looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with the hour. "He is going to be all right," Isabella said quietly. It was not a question. Gerald looked at her. "He is going to be more than all right. He is going to be happy." Pause. "That is a different thing entirely, and considerably harder to achieve." She nodded. "You are not going to leave him," Gerald said. It was also not a question. "No," she said simply. "I am not." Gerald nodded once, satisfied, and they sat together in comfortable silence while the last of the evening light moved through the trees. 6 weeks later, Gerald Whitmore passed away peacefully in his home with Ethan beside him. The shares transferred as the will intended. James Whitmore contested the will and lost, because the marriage was entirely legal and, by the time the lawyers made their arguments, entirely real in every way that a marriage could be. Ethan stood at the window of his home office the day the legal decision came through and felt the weight of the thing settle. Not victory exactly. It's more like the closing of a chapter that had taken too long to finish. Isabella appeared in the doorway behind him. She had been living in the penthouse for 4 months now, and somewhere along the way the guest suite had become simply the room with all her books in it, because she slept in his room and had done so for 6 weeks, and neither of them had made an announcement about it, because it had not felt like something that required one. It had felt like the most natural thing in the world. "It is over," he said. "Some things are," she agreed, coming to stand beside him. "Other things are just beginning." He looked at her. Outside the window, Manhattan moved and hummed and went about its enormous, indifferent life. "I want to tear up the contract," he said.
"Oh, yes?"
"It has been torn up for months," she told him. "You just did not notice." He took her hand and held it and looked out at the city and thought about all the years he had lived inside walls of his own careful construction. All the meals eaten alone, all the evenings, with the light under the office door as the only proof that he was still alive in there. He thought about his grandfather's face on the porch in Connecticut. Satisfied and certain, he thought about Isabella. Walking into his kitchen that first night with one photograph and a determination to water every neglected plant in the place. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning with autumn coming through the open terrace doors, Ethan sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and a small velvet box in front of him. Isabella was making pancakes with her music playing, and she was singing off-key and badly, and it was the best sound he had ever heard in his life. She turned and saw the box and went completely still. He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, and nothing like the functional band he had placed on her finger in a civil ceremony what felt like a lifetime ago. "That contract expired," he said. "I would like to write a different one." Isabella looked at the ring and then at him, and pressed one hand over her mouth briefly before lowering it. Her eyes were full, but she was smiling. The real one. The enormous, uncontrolled one that he had decided within the first 3 weeks was the finest thing he had ever seen. That is a terrible proposal, she said. I am aware. You did not even ask a question. Isabella Carter, he said, looking at her with the steady, unhurried certainty of a man who has found the one solid thing in his world and has no intention of letting it go. Will you stay? She crossed the kitchen and took his face in both hands and kissed him once, then pulled back just enough to look at him clearly.
I was never leaving, she said. He put the ring on her finger. This time he looked at her face when he did it. The pancakes burned. Neither of them cared even slightly. Outside, the city moved on in its enormous ordinary way, completely unaware that inside a penthouse 58 floors above its streets, two people who had signed a contract to pretend had somehow managed to become the realest thing in each other's lives. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.
As this story comes to a close, it leaves behind something more than just entertainment. Stories like this often mirror the complicated emotions people face in real life: love, pride, misunderstanding, ambition, and sometimes regret. When powerful personalities collide, even the smallest movement can lead to consequences no one expected. But now the story belongs to you as much as it belongs to the characters. What did you think about the choices they made? Do you believe the ending was fair? Or would you have handled the situation differently if you were in their place? Every viewer brings a different perspective, and your thoughts might reveal a side of the story others never considered. I had really liked to hear your opinion, so take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you engaged or made you reflect on relationships and life decisions, please take a second to press the like button. It's a simple way to support the channel and helps this story reach more viewers who enjoy emotional storytelling. And if you are someone who enjoys powerful stories about billionaires, CEOs, and the complicated world of human emotions, make sure you subscribe. New stories are shared regularly here, each one designed to surprise you, move you, and sometimes even challenge the way you see certain situations. You can also help the channel grow by sharing this channel and sharing this story with someone who enjoys dramatic storytelling. Thank you for watching and for being the part of storytelling journey.